Our next speaker is a chartered accountant and a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants Ghana. Currently teaches or lectures taxation, fiscal policy and planning, computerized accounting information systems and financial accounting. And prior to going into academia, he did work with the Multimedia Group. I'm very happy to say that. Let's welcome Mr. John Amoh.
Yeah, good morning to all of us. A brief outline of my presentation. I'll be looking at a brief history of VAT, the rationale for the introduction of VAT in Ghana, events after the implementation of VAT, that's the first coming of VAT, then the factors leading to the withdrawal of the first VAT, then the success stories during the reintroduction of VAT in 1998 will also be discussed. Then more importantly, we'll be looking at the journey so far, 20 years of. We'll be looking at the VAT journey so far, the bad and the ugly, and also we'll be looking at the good. From the first presentation, there's no doubt that VAT has now become a very important tool for domestic revenue mobilization. In literature, it's been posited that the adoption or introduction of VAT represents the single most important change in taxation in the 20th century. Currently, as we speak, now, as at 2020, VAT exists in more than 160 countries in the world, and 80% of countries in Sub-Saharan Africa have adopted VAT, which is now responsible for a quarter of tax revenues the world over. We also have to put on record that the EU, European Union, and the IMF played very important roles in the widespread adoption of VAT. The period from 1965 to 1994, that's where we have the indirect tax system. We had several challenges with them because, for example, we had 5 different taxes operating at the same time. We had the sales tax, we have the advertisement tax, we have the games and betting tax, and finally the hotels tax. They were limited in scope, and achievement of revenue targets were a problem. So, factors or the rationale for the introduction of VAT, I'll gloss over the points discussed by our Honorable. One, the first point for the introduction of VAT, the rationale, was that in the 1980s and the 1990s, particularly in the 1990s, there was a gradual decline in foreign aid to developing countries. And according to Van Daal, it was more acute in 1993, where foreign aid from the advanced countries to the developing countries declined by 7%. Then the second reason for the introduction of VAT in Ghana, like I mentioned before, is to replace the 5 basic existing independent taxes, so as to provide a uniform basis for indirect taxation in Ghana. The third reason that is to widen the tax base and broaden the tax base, to widen the tax net and broaden the tax base, so as to increase revenue. Then the fourth reason, rationale for the introduction of VAT in Ghana, was to diversify tax revenue sources. According to Tekwe, 1993, there was a declining export duty on cocoa, and excise duties on petroleum products were also increasing. So therefore, there was the need to look for alternative sources of revenue to support the government budget. Then the fifth reason for the introduction of VAT was the success stories being recorded in countries that have already introduced VAT. And the evidence was copious for Ghana to see that those who have introduced VAT were getting enough revenue. So why not? Then the sixth reason or rationale for the introduction of VAT was to simplify tax administration and enhance compliance. The next was to spread the burden of taxation fairly. We realized that the existing sales tax for 1965 to 1994 was only on consumption, mainly on consumption, but excluded expenditure on goods and services, and there was a need to spread the burden of taxation fairly among taxpayers. The other reason is to correct the cascading effect of tax that the Honorable spoke about. I will skip this. Then events after the VAT was introduced, the first coming of VAT, prices of goods and services shot up. GPRT increased lorry fares by 10%, citing increased prices of spare parts Then there was the media coverage, disturbing newspaper headlines. For example, in the Daily Graphic, they reported VAT, its effect on prices. Then the Business Chronicle gave the headline, VAT, people are charging VAT on VAT. Then the Statesman reported, VAT, the problem solver arrives in Ghana. Then again, the Daily Graphic, VAT forces prices up. Argument from VAT officials. There was argument from the VAT officials that the introduction of VAT will not lead to the escalation in prices, but actually, Honorable, it did. Because you quoted in the Daily Graphic, 22nd March 1995, that it is regrettable for the public to hold those views that actually the introduction of the VAT will lead to increase in prices. Then the president expressed worry about the VAT implementation. Then on the May Day, 1995, our then Vice President, Koinkensa Aka, addressed workers and he called for the withdrawal of the VAT. The other event was that Cabinet decided to review. There was protest against the VAT, etc. Then the withdrawal factors, the main factors leading to the withdrawal of VAT, the first coming, there was a policy management. One, I'm of the opinion that the timing was wrong. 2 months after the 1995 budget had been read, then comes in the VAT. So the timing was wrong. Then one, initially the proposed VAT rate of 17.5% was also considered too high because the sales tax as at that time was 15%. 2, I also shared the opinion that there was poor level of public education by the VAT service. Limited time, you mentioned 18, but I think it was actually 2 months. Then the other issue was that VAT exempted goods, such as foods, had their prices increased. Then it was the first time we're hearing technical words like the input VAT, output VAT, cascading VAT. It so confused the public, being the first time such a law was being implemented. And also the public was not educated well enough that with the introduction of VAT, there was going to be some form of record keeping so as to be able to file the tax returns, etc. Then the other factor grouped under institutional. 1, goods that were exempt under the sales tax were now being taxed under the VAT. An example is Gary. It was quoted in the Daily Graphic and the Statesman. 2, goods that enjoyed exemption under the GPIC Act were subjected to VAT under the VAT. Thirdly, there was a situation where some imported goods that were exempted from VAT, whilst their domestic inputs were being subjected to VAT. Example is imported essential drugs. Then the other problems, difficulties in the computation of VAT, people in displaying goods, people were confused as to what to display. Should they be VAT inclusive or VAT exclusive? It was one of the problems that people encountered. Then political, Honorable spoke about that. But most importantly, the minority, as at the time, I think NDC had 189 members of parliament. But the opposition, the minority leader in parliament, on the floor of parliament, he made a very profound statement that I think affected the thinking of most people. He said that VAT should not be introduced. He referred to VAT as what? Very augmented trouble, VAT. And that caught on with some people. Then lastly, the president, vice president speech to workers on the May Day to revolt against VAT. Then the reintroduction of VAT. Why was it successful? VAT charged 10%. The second introduction, they charged 10% instead of the initial 70.5% because the sales and the service tax was at 15%. I believe there was adequate public education 10 months as against the initial 2 months. And the second time, there was a political commitment from the presidency. The president and key cabinet members openly supported the reintroduction of the VAT. Then also, most importantly, there was inflation, the inflationary pressures of the 1994-95, which put the VAT 94 VAT introduction in jeopardy, had eased. The VAT, the inflation as at that time was as high as 59.5%. But as at the second coming of the VAT, it had eased to make the implementation of the VAT reintroduction very easy. Then VAT still had considerable support in the business sector. I remember the then chairman of Unilever Group, Ishmael Yamson. He gave a speech, a seminar, and he stated that we cannot continue to rely on the traditional revenue sources. For a country to move, a country like Ghana to move and to achieve the sustainable development that we expect, we should embrace VAT. So the second coming of VAT had the support of the business community. Then finally, at the second coming, the opposition boycotted the parliamentary elections. Now with the second coming, they were in parliament, so the taxes changed to make a smooth for the implementation of the VAT. Then the journey so far, the bad and the ugly. The imposition of VAT thresholds, because initially they said it should be it should embrace all sectors of the business community. So we are saying that why should there be introduction of VAT thresholds? It conflicts with retailers who can keep their turnover above the threshold. Normally, there's the justification for the inclusion that record keeping, because of the percentage of our population that are unlettered, record keeping could pose a challenge for the small and the petty retailers. And also the second reason is that we need to maximize our scarce resources by concentrating our attention on the large and the medium scale enterprises. But to me, the general principle for even setting a threshold it should be at a point where the cost of collection are balanced against the revenue lost. The second bad and the ugly about VAT introduction 20 years is that it's the non-deductibility of the 17.5% input tax by the retailers and the wholesalers, which I think Doctor has done justice to that. Then the third issue, the bad and the ugly side, the third issue, negative side of the introduction of the VAT, is about fairness and equity. The ability to pay, I believe, was not taken into consideration. Is it fair to impose a flat rate where the poor will have a chunk of their income going to a particular item? Then the fourth area is about regressive nature of VAT. VAT, to me, has not found enough reasons to go around the regressive nature of VAT. How do we make the regressive nature of VAT less burdensome to taxpayers? People talk about the low income subsidies. Honorable was talking about the National Health Insurance Scheme. Is that enough to go around the regressive nature of VAT? Still thinking. Then, when Honorable was talking about the major changes of the VAT in the 2012 major amendments, we noticed that there was less stakeholder consultations. That's how come VAT was introduced on the real estate and the financial sectors. And for that reason, it was soon thereafter suspended. The sixth issue, the bad and the ugly, is the issue of the VAT tax refunds. I think we still have issues with VAT tax refunds. Then the good, 20 years of VAT, it has led to increased tax revenues. The first year after it was introduced, revenues shot up by 20%, even though at a lower rate of 10%. Then less than 2 years after its reintroduction, the VAT was raised from 10% to 12%. This from IMF, VAT revenue as a percentage of GDP. You notice that even when the second introduction came, the VAT, in 1999, 98, 99, the VAT revenue as a percentage of GDP was still below 1%. So in 2001, it was still below that. But in 2003, total VAT revenue as a percentage of GDP shot up to 3.3%. And currently, as we speak, 2017, the total VAT revenue as a percentage of GDP is now 4.4%. So it means that it's brought about increased tax revenue. Then the second one is a reduction in tax evasion after reintroduction. A paper I published with Adafula. We noticed that in 1994, the tax evasion as a percentage of GDP was what? 20.67%. Then in 1998, it was 19.64%. But a year after the introduction of VAT, reintroduction, the tax evasion rate dropped to what? 18.76%. So we're saying that the introduction of VAT has brought about a reduction in tax evasion, tax fraud, and tax avoidance. Then the third issue, the good aspect of VAT, is that I'm saying that the VAT pivoted the introduction of National Health Insurance Levy. Because I'm wondering, it's a social intervention. But if it had not been linked to the levy and collection of VAT, I wonder if it would have survived. Though Honorable said it was actually part of this thing that was brought, VAT that was brought. But how many of us know about that? So, and the same thing applies to what the GET fund that Honorable spoke about. That VAT, the introduction of VAT, gave them a leverage for them to be successful. Then the fifth item is about VAT exempted items and zero rated. So I'm asking the question, by exempting certain goods and labeling certain goods and services as zero rated, are we addressing the regressive nature of VAT? Then the sixth item, the good side of VAT, 20 years of implementation, is the perceived effectiveness of VAT. We can see it. Over 180 countries have so far adopted and implemented successfully VAT, with maximum revenues being recorded. Out of that, it's only 3 out of the 5 that removed the policy initially. 3, including Ghana, have reintroduced. So there's the perceived effectiveness of VAT. The 7th area is the innovative self-policing feature, when documentation is simple and understood by the taxpayer. Then finally, there's the elimination of multiple indirect taxes. Now VAT, before VAT was introduced, as I mentioned here, we had 5 major indirect taxes. We have the sales tax, we have the hotels and restaurant tax, we have the advertisement tax, we have the betting tax, and the entertainment tax. So the VAT came to consolidate all this into one tax that will help avoid economic distortions, tax complexities that are normally caused by diverse indirect policies. Thank you very much.